In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where dust devils dance across barren landscapes and the sun beats down mercilessly on military convoys, there lived a woman whose true identity was hidden behind flour-dusted aprons and the clatter of mess hall pots. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been relegated to what many considered the least glamorous job in the entire military operation, cooking for hundreds of soldiers who barely looked up from their plates long enough to acknowledge her existence. But what they didn't know about Maria would soon shake the very foundation of their assumptions about courage, skill, and the deadly precision that can emerge from the most unexpected places. Maria had joined the Army 8 years prior, not out of some burning desire for glory or recognition, but because her family's restaurant back in El Paso, Texas, had fallen on hard times. The recession had hit small businesses particularly hard, and watching her father's dreams crumble night after night had instilled in her a fierce determination to never be helpless again. She enlisted with hopes of learning skills that could help her family rebuild, but the military had other plans. Her exceptional marksmanship scores during basic training had caught the attention of her superiors, who recommended her for specialized sniper training, a program that would push her physical and mental limits far beyond anything she had ever imagined. The training was brutal. For months, Maria learned to control her breathing, to calculate wind speed and bullet drop with mathematical precision, and to remain motionless for hours in the most uncomfortable positions imaginable. She mastered the art of camouflage, learning to become one with her environment until she was practically invisible. Her instructors, initially skeptical of having a woman in the program, gradually came to respect her unwavering focus and natural talent. She could hit targets at distances that made even seasoned veterans shake their heads in amazement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But military bureaucracy had its own twisted sense of humor. Despite her exceptional qualifications and proven abilities, Maria found herself assigned to the kitchen of Forward Operating Base Wolverine, a remote outpost nestled in the Hindu Kush Mountains, where the most dangerous thing she was expected to encounter was an overcooked pot roast. The official reason given was operational needs, but Maria suspected it had more to do with the old boys club mentality that still pervaded certain corners of the military. Her commanding officer, Colonel Hayes, had made it clear that he believed women belonged in support roles, not on the front lines with a rifle in their hands. For 3 months, Maria endured the monotonous routine of pre-dawn kitchen prep, serving meals to soldiers who saw her as nothing more than another piece of equipment. She watched through the mess hall windows as patrol teams prepared for missions, their gear meticulously checked and rechecked, their faces bearing the weight of the dangerous work ahead. Meanwhile, she chopped vegetables and stirred enormous pots of stew, her sniper skills slowly deteriorating from disuse. The frustration was eating away at her, but she maintained her professionalism, knowing that any outburst would only confirm the prejudices of those who had relegated her to this position. The other soldiers barely acknowledged her existence. To them, she was just Santos the cook, a background figure who ensured their meals appeared on time and tasted reasonably edible. They had no idea that the woman ladling mashed potatoes onto their plates could thread a needle with a bullet from 800 yards away, or that she had scored higher in advanced marksmanship training than 90% of the men in their unit. Maria had become invisible in plain sight, which would soon prove to be either her greatest advantage or her most dangerous liability. Late at night, when the kitchen was finally quiet and the last dish had been washed and stored, Maria would sometimes retrieve her rifle from the locked storage area where it had been gathering dust. She would carefully clean and maintain it, running her fingers along the familiar contours of the stock and scope, remembering the feeling of perfect alignment between eye, weapon, and target. These stolen moments were her only connection to the soldier she had trained to become. a reminder of skills that were being wasted in the name of bureaucratic convenience and institutional bias. The morning of September 15th started like any other at Forward Operating Base Wolverine. Maria was in the kitchen by 0430 hours, her hands already working through the familiar motions of breakfast preparation for the 200-plus soldiers stationed at the remote outpost. The industrial-sized coffee makers gurgled to life, filling the air with the rich aroma that would soon draw sleepy soldiers from their bunks. Steam rose from enormous pots of scrambled eggs while strips of bacon sizzled on the massive griddles, creating a symphony of morning sounds that had become as routine as breathing. But routine, as Maria had learned during her years of service, was often nothing more than a thin veneer covering the unpredictable chaos that defined military life in a combat zone. Today, that veneer was about to be torn away completely at 0600 hours, as soldiers began filtering into the mess hall for their morning meal. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison approached Maria's serving station with an expression that immediately put her on high alert. Morrison was the kind of officer who never wasted words, and the tight lines around his eyes suggested this wasn't going to be a casual conversation about menu planning. "Santos," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, mixed with something that sounded almost like apology. "I need you to gear up. We've got a situation developing, and we're short on qualified personnel." Maria's heart rate immediately quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "What kind of situation, sir?" "Supply convoy got hit about 15 clicks north of here. They're pinned down in a valley, taking heavy fire from elevated positions. We're scrambling a rescue team, but—" Morrison paused, clearly struggling with what he was about to say. "Look, I know you've been stuck in this kitchen for months, but your jacket shows sniper qualification. We need every skilled marksman we can get." For a moment, Maria couldn't quite process what she was hearing. After months of being treated like nothing more than a mess hall fixture, she was suddenly being asked to step back into the role she had trained for, the role she had been denied. The irony wasn't lost on her. It had taken a crisis to remind her superiors that she was actually a soldier. "How long do I have to prepare?" she asked, already mentally inventorying the equipment she would need. 15 minutes. Transport leaves at 0630 sharp. Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Santos, I know this is sudden, but the men out there ... they need help. And according to your training records, you're one of the best shots we've got on this base." Maria nodded curtly, already untying her apron. "I'll be ready, sir." As Morrison walked away, Maria felt a mixture of emotions coursing through her system. There was relief at finally being given a chance to use her actual skills, anxiety about stepping back into a role she hadn't performed in months, and underneath it all, a cold determination to prove that she belonged on the battlefield, not behind a serving line. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Maria retrieved her rifle from storage, checking every component with a methodical precision that had been drilled into her during training. The weapon felt familiar in her hands, like greeting an old friend after a long separation. She loaded her gear bag with ammunition, her ghillie suit, and the various tools of her trade range finder, wind meter, and the countless small items that could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As she changed into her combat uniform, Maria caught a glimpse of herself in the small mirror mounted on her locker door. The woman staring back at her looked different, somehow more focused, more dangerous. The cook was disappearing, replaced by the sniper who had been lurking beneath the surface all along. The armored vehicles were already running when Maria emerged from the barracks, their engines creating a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. She could see the other members of the rescue team making final preparations, checking weapons and communication equipment with the kind of urgent efficiency that came from knowing lives hung in the balance. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, the Team leader approached her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism written across his weathered face. "So you're the cook who's supposed to be some kind of sharpshooter?" Maria met his gaze steadily. "I'm the soldier who's been assigned to this mission, Sergeant. My previous duties are irrelevant." Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Hope you're as good as Morrison says you are, because where we're going, there won't be any second chances." As the convoy prepared to move out, Maria felt the familiar pre-mission clarity settling over her mind. All the frustration and anger from the past months began to crystallize into something much more useful, a focused determination to prove her worth and save the lives of soldiers who were counting on her skills. She had waited 3 months for this opportunity, and she wasn't going to waste it. The gates of Forward Operating Base Wolverine swung open, and the rescue convoy rolled out into the harsh Afghan landscape, carrying with it a cook who was about to remind everyone what she was really capable of. The armored vehicles carved through the mountainous terrain like mechanical beasts, their thick tires kicking up clouds of dust that painted the landscape in shades of brown and gray. Maria sat in the back of the lead vehicle, her rifle secured between her knees, while the other team members went over intelligence reports and tactical plans. The convoy that had been attacked was carrying critical supplies to another forward operating base medical equipment, ammunition, and food that dozens of soldiers were depending on to survive another week in this godforsaken landscape. As they approached the coordinates where the ambush had occurred, the sound of distant gunfire became increasingly audible over the rumble of their engines. Radio chatter crackled through their communication systems, painting a grim picture of the situation ahead. The supply convoy had been traveling through a narrow valley when insurgents had opened fire from concealed positions on the surrounding ridges. The convoy's security team had managed to establish a defensive perimeter, but they were vastly outnumbered and running low on ammunition. "Multiple hostiles confirmed on the eastern ridge," came the voice of Captain Williams, the supply convoy's commander, over the radio. His transmission was punctuated by the distinctive crack of rifle fire in the background. "We've got wounded and we're taking heavy fire from at least 3 different positions. Enemy appears to have RPGs and automatic weapons." Rodriguez keyed his radio microphone. "Copy that, Williams. ETA to your position is 5 minutes. Can you hold until then?" "We'll have to," Williams replied, his voice tight with strain. "But make it fast. We're burning through our remaining ammo." Maria listened to the exchange while mentally preparing for what lay ahead. She had studied the topographical maps during the drive, noting the elevation changes and potential shooting positions that would give her the best vantage points. The valley where the convoy was trapped was essentially a kill zone, a narrow passage between 2 ridges that provided perfect cover for attackers while leaving the vehicles below exposed and vulnerable. As their rescue convoy crested a small hill, the scene of the ambush came into view. Below them, 4 military vehicles were arranged in a defensive circle, their occupants using the armored hulls as cover while returning fire toward the eastern ridge. Smoke rose from one of the vehicles, and Maria could see several figures lying motionless beside the convoy casualties of the initial attack. "There," Rodriguez pointed toward a series of muzzle flashes visible on the ridge, approximately 600 meters away. "That's where most of the fire is coming from. Santos, think you can reach them from here?" Maria raised her rifle and peered through the scope, quickly calculating distance, wind speed, and elevation. The targets were well concealed among the rocks and sparse vegetation, but she could make out at least 3 distinct firing positions. "I can engage from this position, but I'll need to move closer to be effective. The angle isn't optimal from here." "Negative," Rodriguez replied firmly. "We stick to the plan. Suppressive fire from here while Alpha Team moves to flank their position." But even as Rodriguez spoke, Maria could see that the plan was already falling apart. The insurgents had chosen their position well, with clear fields of fire in multiple directions and natural cover that would make a flanking maneuver extremely difficult. The rescue team would take heavy casualties trying to approach on foot, and the supply convoy didn't have time to wait for a prolonged firefight. "Sergeant, with respect, that approach is going to get people killed," Maria said, her voice calm but insistent. "Let me move to that outcropping at 2 o'clock. I can get a better angle and start taking out their shooters systematically." Rodriguez looked where she was pointing, a rocky formation about 300 meters away. That would put her much closer to the enemy position, but also expose her to return fire. Too risky. "We can't afford to lose you if this goes sideways." "You can't afford not to use me," Maria replied, already shouldering her gear. "Those men down there are dying while we debate tactics. I'm going to move to that position and start engaging targets. You can either support me or explain to their families why you let them die." Before Rodriguez could respond, Maria was already moving, sprinting toward the rocky outcropping with the fluid motion of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of situation. She could hear Rodriguez cursing behind her, but she also heard him ordering the rest of the team to provide covering fire, a sign that, despite his reservations, he understood the necessity of her plan. The run to the outcropping felt like it took forever, though Maria knew it was probably less than 30 seconds. Bullets whined overhead as the insurgents noticed her movement, but their fire was wild and poorly aimed. She reached the rocks and immediately began setting up her shooting position, using the natural contours of the stone to create a stable platform for her rifle. Through her scope, the enemy positions became much clearer. She could see individual fighters moving between cover, their weapons glinting in the harsh Afghan sun. More importantly, she could see the supply convoy below, where wounded soldiers were being dragged to safety behind the vehicles, while their comrades continued to return fire with dwindling ammunition supplies. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm that came over her whenever she lined up a shot. This was what she had trained for, what she had been denied for months while serving meals to soldiers who saw her as nothing more than kitchen help. Now, with lives hanging in the balance, she was finally being given the chance to prove what she was really capable of. She acquired her first target, a fighter with an RPG launcher who was preparing to fire on the trapped convoy. At this distance, it would be a challenging shot, but well within her capabilities. Maria controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow, and gently squeezed the trigger. The valley erupted in chaos as her shot echoed off the surrounding mountains, and everything changed forever. What happened in the next few moments would not only save the lives of 15 American soldiers, but would shatter every assumption her fellow troops had made about the quiet woman who had been serving their meals for the past 3 months. Echo of Maria's rifle shot was still reverberating through the mountain passes when the impossible became reality. In that single moment, the balance of power in the valley shifted completely. The insurgent with the RPG launcher, who had been preparing to deliver a devastating blow to the trapped convoy below, suddenly crumpled behind his rocky cover. His weapon clattered down the mountainside, rendering useless what could have been a fatal strike against the American soldiers. But Maria didn't pause to admire her handiwork. She was already acquiring her second target, a machine gunner whose sustained fire had been keeping the convoy's defenders pinned down behind their vehicles. Through her scope, she could see the man's face clearly, his expression focused and determined as he raked the valley floor with automatic fire. Maria adjusted for the slight wind that had picked up, compensated for the target's movement, and squeezed the trigger again. The machine gun fell silent. Down in the valley, Captain Williams couldn't believe what he was seeing. For the past 20 minutes, his men had been trapped in what seemed like an impossible situation, taking casualties while their ammunition supplies dwindled. Now suddenly, the enemy fire was becoming sporadic and disorganized. Someone was systematically eliminating the insurgents' most dangerous weapons. Who the hell is up there? Williams shouted over the radio, his voice mixing disbelief with desperate hope. Rodriguez's response came back immediately. "That's Santos, our cook." "Your cook?" Williams couldn't hide his confusion. "Since when do cooks shoot like that?" Maria, meanwhile, was completely focused on her task. She had identified at least 7 distinct enemy positions, and each one represented a threat to the soldiers trapped below. Moving with the methodical precision that had made her one of the top marksmen in her training class, she began working her way through the targets systematically. Her third shot eliminated a sniper who had been trying to draw a bead on the convoys. Medic, the fourth, took out a fighter who was attempting to flank the American position. With each shot, Maria felt the familiar rhythm of combat settling over her, the calm calculation of distance and wind, the controlled breathing, the moment of perfect stillness before the trigger pull. But the insurgents weren't going to sit still and let themselves be picked off. They began to realize that their attack was being disrupted by a single shooter, and several of them turned their attention toward Maria's position. Bullets began to strike the rocks around her, sending up sprays of stone fragments that cut at her exposed skin. "Santos, you need to displace." Rodriguez's voice crackled over her radio. "They've got your position." Maria knew he was right. One of the fundamental rules of sniper tactics was never to remain in the same firing position for too long. But as she prepared to move, she saw something through her scope that made her blood run cold. A group of insurgents was moving around the western edge of the valley, clearly attempting to flank the trapped convoy from an angle that would leave the Americans completely exposed. If she moved now, she would lose her angle of fire on the flanking force. If she stayed, she risked being overrun by the fighters who were already closing in on her position. It was the kind of impossible choice that defined combat, a moment where every decision carried the weight of life and death. Maria made her choice. Instead of withdrawing, she shifted her position slightly within the rocky outcropping, finding a new angle that would allow her to engage the flanking force while maintaining some protection from the fighters who were trying to reach her. It was a calculated risk, but one that she believed was necessary to save the lives of the men trapped below. Her fifth shot caught the lead flanker in the chest, sending him tumbling down the rocky slope. The sixth and seventh shots followed, in rapid succession, each one finding its mark with deadly precision. The flanking attack collapsed as the remaining insurgents sought cover, their advance halted by the devastating accuracy of Maria's rifle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But Maria's position was becoming increasingly untenable. The insurgents who had been trying to reach her were getting closer, and she could hear their voices calling out to each other as they coordinated their assault. She had maybe 2 minutes before they would be close enough to overwhelm her position with sheer numbers. "Rodriguez, I need immediate support at my position," she called over the radio, her voice maintaining its professional calm despite the increasingly desperate situation. "Alpha Team is moving to your location," Rodriguez replied. "Hold your position for 90 seconds. 90 seconds. In combat, that might as well have been 90 minutes. Maria could see at least 4 insurgents working their way toward her through the rocky terrain, and she knew there were probably more that she couldn't see. Her ammunition was running low, and her position was becoming more exposed with each passing moment. She took another shot, dropping one of the approaching fighters, but the others were learning from her tactics. They were using cover more effectively, advancing in short rushes that made them difficult targets. Maria realized that she was facing a fundamental shift in the tactical situation. She was no longer the hunter, but had become the hunted. Through her scope, she could see that the supply convoy was beginning to move. Captain Williams had taken advantage of the disruption she had caused to reorganize his defense and prepare for a breakout attempt. Several of his vehicles were already moving toward the valley's exit, carrying wounded soldiers to safety. The sight gave Maria a surge of satisfaction. Whatever happened to her in the next few minutes, she had accomplished her mission. The men she had come to save were going to make it home. But she wasn't ready to give up just yet. The rocky outcropping that had provided Maria with the perfect shooting platform was now becoming her fortress and potentially her tomb. The insurgents had closed to within 50 meters of her position, their voices growing louder as they coordinated their final assault. Through the gaps in the rocks she could see muzzle flashes as they laid down covering fire for their advancing comrades. Maria's ammunition count was becoming critical. She had started the mission with 60 rounds, and by her mental count, she had fewer than 20 left. Each shot now had to count not just for accuracy, but for survival. She was no longer just providing support for the convoy, she was fighting for her own life. Her radio crackled with Rodriguez's voice. "Santos, Alpha Team is 30 seconds out. Can you hold?" "Negative on holding," Maria replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "I'm going to have to move. There are too many of them." But even as she spoke, Maria knew that moving was going to be nearly impossible. The insurgents had positioned themselves to cut off her most obvious escape routes, and the terrain offered little in the way of alternative paths. She was trapped in a situation that would have challenged even the most experienced special operations. "Soldier," that's when she remembered something from her advanced training, a lesson about using the enemy's expectations against them. Every fighter on that mountainside expected her to either hold her position until reinforcements arrived or attempt to retreat toward friendly lines. What they wouldn't expect was for her to advance. Maria made a decision that would have seemed insane to any rational observer. Instead of waiting for the insurgents to reach her position, she was going to go to them. She gathered her remaining ammunition and began moving through the rocky terrain, not away from the enemy, but toward them. Using the natural contours of the mountainside, she worked her way around the flank of the advancing insurgents, staying low and moving with the silent precision that had been drilled into her during training. The first insurgent never saw her coming. Maria emerged from behind a large boulder just as he was preparing to throw a grenade toward her former position. Her knife found its mark before he could cry out, and she was already moving toward the next target. In close quarters combat, her sniper training proved surprisingly valuable. The same patience and precision that made her deadly at long range served her well in the intimate brutality of hand-to-hand fighting. The second insurgent turned just as Maria reached him, his eyes widening in shock as he realized that the American sniper he had been hunting was now hunting him. He tried to bring his AK-47 around, but Maria was already inside his guard, her combat knife finding the gap between his ribs with surgical precision. By the time the remaining insurgents realized what was happening, Maria had already eliminated 3 of their number and was moving toward a 4th. The psychological impact of her assault was devastating. They had come to overwhelm a single sniper, only to find themselves being stalked by a predator who seemed to materialize from the rocks themselves. "Contact! Contact!" One of the insurgents shouted in Pashto, his voice cracking with panic. "She's behind us." The confusion that followed was exactly what Maria had hoped for. The insurgents began firing wildly, unsure of where the threat was coming from. In their panic, they began shooting at shadows and each other, their coordinated assault dissolving into chaos. Maria used the confusion to her advantage, moving through the rocky terrain like a ghost. She picked up a fallen AK-47 from one of the fighters she had eliminated, checking the magazine and finding it nearly full. The weapon felt strange in her hands after months of precision shooting, but she quickly adapted to its capabilities. From her new position, she could see the Alpha Team approaching from the valley floor. Rodriguez was leading 4 other soldiers in a flanking maneuver designed to relieve the pressure on her position. But they were moving into what could easily become a crossfire situation if the remaining insurgents regrouped. Maria realized that she had one more task to complete before this engagement was over. She needed to eliminate the remaining enemy fighters before they could turn their attention to the approaching rescue team. Using the higher ground to her advantage, she began engaging the insurgents with their own weapon, the familiar crack of a K-47 fire echoing off the mountainside. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who had been considered too delicate for combat duty was now single-handedly dismantling an insurgent cell with a combination of precision shooting and aggressive tactics that would have impressed even the most hardened special operations soldier. One by one, the remaining insurgents fell to her assault. Some tried to flee, only to be cut down as they exposed themselves while running. Others attempted to surrender, but in the chaos of combat, their gestures were misinterpreted or ignored. Within minutes, the mountainside fell silent except for the approaching footsteps of the Alpha team. Rodriguez was the first to reach Maria's position, his face a mixture of amazement and professional respect. "Santos, what the hell just happened?" "Here." Maria looked around at the aftermath of the engagement. The rocky terrain littered with the bodies of insurgents who had underestimated both her capabilities and her determination. She ejected the magazine from the captured K-47 and let the weapon fall to the ground, then retrieved her sniper rifle from where she had left it. "I did my job, Sergeant," she replied simply. "The convoy is safe and the enemy has been neutralized." News of the engagement spread through Forward Operating Base Wolverine like wildfire. By the time the rescue convoy returned with the saved supply team, nearly every soldier on the base had heard some version of the story. The details varied, depending on who was telling it, but the central facts remained consistent. The cook had saved an entire convoy using skills that nobody knew she possessed. Colonel Hayes was waiting in the command center when Rodriguez submitted his after-action report. The colonel's expression was unreadable as he listened to the detailed account of Maria's performance during the engagement. When Rodriguez finished, Hayes sat in silence for several minutes, studying the tactical map and the casualty reports. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Sergeant," Hayes finally said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Staff Sergeant Santos, who has been assigned to kitchen duty for the past 3 months, single-handedly eliminated an entire insurgent cell and saved the lives of at least 15 American soldiers." "That's correct, sir," Rodriguez replied, meeting his commanding officer's gaze steadily. Her actions were nothing short of extraordinary. Without her intervention, we would have lost that entire convoy. Hayes stood and walked to the window, looking out at the base where soldiers were going about their daily routines. "And her sniper qualifications? How did I not know about those?" "They're in her personnel file, sir. She scored in the top 5% of her training class. According to her records, she's qualified on multiple weapons systems and has advanced training in reconnaissance and surveillance." The colonel's jaw tightened. He had been the one who had made the decision to assign Maria to kitchen duty, influenced by his own prejudices about women in combat roles. Now those prejudices had been exposed not just as wrong, but as potentially catastrophic. If today's emergency hadn't occurred, Maria's skills would have remained buried in the kitchen while soldiers died in situations where she could have made a difference. "I want to see her personnel file," Hayes said quietly. "All of it. And I want to see her in my office in 1 hour." Meanwhile, Maria was in the armory, cleaning her weapons and restocking her ammunition. The familiar ritual of post-combat maintenance gave her time to process what had happened. She had proven herself in the most decisive way possible, but she wasn't sure what that meant for her future. The military bureaucracy that had relegated her to kitchen duty was still in place, and she had learned not to assume that exceptional performance would automatically lead to recognition or advancement. Other soldiers had begun to approach her, their attitudes markedly different from the casual dismissal she had grown accustomed to. Staff Sergeant Williams, who had barely acknowledged her existence during the months she had served his meals, now looked at her with something approaching awe. "Santos," Williams said, approaching her workstation hesitantly. "I wanted to thank you for what you did out there. My buddy Martinez was in that convoy, and, well, you saved his life." Maria looked up from her rifle maintenance, studying Williams' face. "I did what any soldier would have done, Staff Sergeant. That's what we're here for." "No," Williams replied, shaking his head. "What you did out there wasn't standard. I've been in combat for 6 years, and I've never seen anything like it. You took out an entire insurgent cell by yourself. That's not normal, Santos. That's exceptional." Similar conversations were happening throughout the base. Soldiers who had seen Maria as nothing more than a background figure were suddenly realizing that they had been sharing meals with one of the most skilled fighters in their unit. The cognitive dissonance was jarring. How could someone they had so completely dismissed possess such extraordinary capabilities? Lieutenant Morrison found Maria in the armory and delivered the message about Colonel Hayes' summons. As she made her way to the command center, Maria prepared herself for what could be either recognition or reprimand. She had disobeyed orders by leaving her assigned position during the engagement, and she had taken risks that could have resulted in the loss of valuable personnel, namely herself. The colonel's office was spartanly decorated, with maps of the local area covering most of the walls. Hayes was sitting behind his desk when Maria entered, his expression giving nothing away about his intentions. "Staff Sergeant Santos," he began, his voice formal and controlled. "I've been reviewing your performance during today's engagement, as well as your personnel file. It appears that I may have made some errors in judgment regarding your assignment." Maria stood at attention, her face carefully neutral. "Sir, I serve where I'm assigned. My personal preferences are irrelevant to the mission." Hayes studied her for a moment, perhaps recognizing the diplomatic way she had just avoided criticizing his decision-making. "Your personal preferences may be irrelevant, but your skills are not. According to Sergeant Rodriguez's report, you eliminated at least 11 enemy combatants and saved the lives of 15 American soldiers. That's not the performance of someone who should be confined to kitchen duty." "I did what was necessary, sir," Maria replied simply. "Yes, you did. And that's exactly why I'm making some changes." Hayes opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a set of orders. "Effective immediately, you're being reassigned to the base's reconnaissance team. Your primary duties will involve long-range surveillance and precision engagement of high-value targets. Your secondary duties will include training other soldiers in advanced marksmanship techniques." Maria felt a surge of satisfaction, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "You already haven't," Hayes replied. Dismissed. As Maria left the colonel's office, she realized that everything had changed. She was no longer the invisible cook who served meals to soldiers who barely acknowledged her existence. She was now a recognized asset, a warrior whose skills were valued and whose contributions would be remembered. But recognition was one thing proving. Herself in an ongoing capacity would be another challenge entirely. The real test of her transformation was about to begin. Within 24 hours of her meeting with Colonel Hayes, Maria discovered what that real test would entail. The transformation in her status at Forward Operating Base Wolverine was immediate and profound. Within hours of her reassignment, she found herself in situations that would have been unthinkable just days before. Instead of reporting to the kitchen before dawn, she was now attending intelligence briefings where officers discussed enemy movements and tactical priorities. The maps on the walls were no longer just decoration. They were her new workplace. Major Peterson, the intelligence officer, briefed her on the current threat situation in their area of operations. "We've been tracking a high-value target in the surrounding mountains," he explained, pointing to a series of marked locations on the topographical map. This individual is believed to be coordinating attacks against coalition forces and has been responsible for at least 3 IED incidents in the past month. Maria studied the map carefully, noting the elevation changes and potential observation points. What's the intelligence on his movement patterns? He's been spotted in this valley approximately every third day, usually in the early morning hours. Local sources suggest he's meeting with other insurgent leaders to coordinate future attacks. Peterson handed her a reconnaissance folder. Your mission is to establish an observation post and gather intelligence on his activities. If the opportunity presents itself for a clean engagement, you're authorized to take the shot. Maria nodded, understanding the gravity of what she was being asked to do. This wasn't just about proving herself in a crisis situation. This was about actively hunting one of the most dangerous insurgents in the region. The trust being placed in her was both exhilarating and sobering. "I'll need a spotter," she said, thinking through the tactical requirements. At least 48 hours to establish proper camouflage and observation positions. Sergeant Mitchell will be your spotter. He's got experience in reconnaissance operations and understands the importance of remaining undetected. Peterson closed the folder and looked at her seriously. "Santos, this target has been evading our forces for months. He's smart, careful, and extremely dangerous. If you can eliminate him, it will significantly disrupt insurgent operations in this entire region." That evening, Maria found herself in the unusual position of being approached by soldiers who wanted to talk with her, rather than simply collect their meals. The mess hall conversations had taken on a different tone. Instead of the casual chatter about sports scores and letters from home, soldiers were asking her about marksmanship techniques and combat tactics. Corporal Jenkins, a young soldier who had been in country for only 2 months, approached her table hesitantly. "Staff Sergeant Santos, I heard about what you did out there. I was wondering, could you maybe give me some pointers on long-range shooting? I'm having trouble with my qualifications." Maria looked up from her meal, seeing the genuine eagerness in the young soldier's eyes. "What specifically are you struggling with?" "Wind compensation mostly. I can hit stationary targets fine, but when there's any kind of crosswind, my shots start going wide." Jenkins sat down across from her, his expression hopeful. "I know you're probably busy with your new assignment, but if you could spare maybe an hour." "Report to the range tomorrow at 0700, Maria said simply. "Bring your weapon and 100 rounds of ammunition. We'll work on reading wind conditions and making proper adjustments." Jenkins' face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. I really appreciate it." As Jenkins walked away, Maria realized that this was yet another aspect of her new role that she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just a sniper now, she was becoming a teacher, passing on skills that could save lives. The knowledge that had been locked away while she served meals was now being shared with soldiers who needed it. The next morning, Maria met Sergeant Mitchell at the equipment room to prepare for their reconnaissance mission. Mitchell was a seasoned soldier with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in harsh conditions. He greeted her with professional respect, showing none of the skepticism she had grown accustomed to. "I've reviewed the intelligence package," Mitchell said, as they checked their equipment. "The target area is about 8 kilometers from here, with good overwatch positions on the northern ridge. If we move out at 0400, we can be in position before first light." Maria nodded, running through her mental checklist of equipment and procedures. "How's the local population in that area?" "Mostly sympathetic to coalition forces, but there are definitely some insurgent supporters. We'll need to be careful about our approach and exfiltration routes." Mitchell shouldered his pack and checked his radio. "I've got to say, Santos, after hearing about your performance during the convoy rescue, I'm looking forward to working with you." "Just do your job and I'll do mine," Maria replied. But she appreciated the straightforward professionalism in his tone. As they prepared to leave the base, Maria caught sight of the kitchen where she had spent the previous 3 months. The morning shift was already at work, preparing breakfast for the soldiers who would be waking up in a few hours. For a moment, she felt a strange nostalgia for the simplicity of that routine, the predictable rhythms of meal preparation, the straightforward nature of feeding hungry soldiers. But that nostalgia was quickly replaced by anticipation. She was finally doing what she had trained for, what she was meant to do. The skills that had been wasted in the kitchen were now being put to their proper use, and she was about to embark on a mission that could save countless lives by eliminating a dangerous enemy. The gates of Forward Operating Base Wolverine opened in the pre-dawn darkness, and Maria stepped out into the Afghan mountains as a hunter, not a cook. The woman who had once been invisible behind serving lines was now about to become the most dangerous person in these mountains. That danger would manifest itself sooner than anyone expected. The pre-dawn darkness provided perfect cover as Maria and Mitchell made their way through the rugged mountain terrain toward their objective. They moved with the silent efficiency of experienced soldiers, their movements coordinated through hand signals and years of training. Each step was carefully placed to avoid loose rocks or dry vegetation that might betray their presence to hostile observers. The 8-kilometer journey took them through some of the most challenging terrain in the region. Narrow ridges dropped away into deep valleys, while ancient goat paths wound between towering rock formations that had been shaped by millennia of wind and weather. Maria's pack, loaded with specialized sniper equipment and supplies for a potentially extended observation period, felt heavier with each passing kilometer. "Target area is just over this ridge," Mitchell whispered, pointing toward a rocky outcropping that would provide them with an elevated view of the valley below. "We'll need to be extra careful from here on. Intelligence suggests there may be early warning systems in place." Maria nodded, switching her rifle to a more readily accessible position. The possibility of encountering insurgent sentries was always present in these mountains, and she had learned during the convoy rescue that the enemy was skilled at using the terrain to their advantage. As they crested the ridge, the target valley spread out below them like a tactical map come to life. The intelligence reports had been accurate. The valley provided multiple concealed routes that would allow insurgent leaders to meet while remaining hidden from aerial surveillance. Rock formations and sparse vegetation offered natural camouflage, while the surrounding ridges provided numerous escape routes. "There," Mitchell pointed to a cluster of rocks about 400 meters into the valley. "That's where the meetings have been observed. We'll set up our observation post on that promontory. To the east, it'll give us a clear field of fire and multiple exfiltration routes." The next hour was spent in meticulous preparation. Maria and Mitchell established their hide site using natural materials and specialized camouflage equipment, creating a position that would be virtually invisible to anyone more than 50 meters away. The process required patience and attention to detail. Every piece of equipment had to be positioned for maximum effectiveness while maintaining concealment. Maria set up her rifle with the methodical precision that had become second nature. She checked the scope alignment, verified her ammunition count, and established range markers for various points throughout the valley. The target area was well within her effective range, but she also prepared for the possibility of engaging multiple targets at different distances. "Comms check," Mitchell whispered, testing their radio equipment. The connection back to base was clear, ensuring that they could call for extraction or support if the situation deteriorated. As the sun began to rise over the mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber, Maria settled into the patient mindset that defines sniper operations. This could be a long wait. Intelligence suggested their target appeared every third day, but there was no guarantee he would maintain that pattern. "Movement in the valley," Mitchell reported, studying the area through his binoculars. "Two individuals approaching from the southwest." Maria shifted her rifle toward the indicated direction, acquiring the targets through her scope. Two men were making their way through the rocky terrain, both carrying AK-47 rifles and moving with the cautious alertness of experienced fighters. Neither matched the description of their primary target, but their presence suggested that the intelligence about this location was accurate. "Possible advanced security," Maria whispered. "They're checking the meeting site." The two men spent several minutes examining the area where the meetings were supposed to take place, looking for signs of surveillance or booby traps. Their professional thoroughness suggested they were more than simple foot soldiers. These were experienced operatives who understood the importance of operational security. After completing their sweep, the two men took up positions that provided them with clear views of the valley's entrance points. They were establishing a security perimeter, which meant the meeting was likely to occur within the next few hours. "Target is probably en route," Mitchell observed. "This is definitely a security sweep." Maria adjusted her position slightly, ensuring that she had clear lines of sight to both the meeting location and the security positions. If she needed to engage the target, she would also need to neutralize the security team quickly to prevent them from interfering with her shot or calling for reinforcements. The morning wore on with agonizing slowness. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the temperature began to rise, making their concealed position increasingly uncomfortable. Maria fought off the urge to shift position or adjust her equipment, knowing that even the slightest movement could reveal their location to the trained eyes of the insurgent security team. At 10:30 hours, Mitchell's voice carried a note of tension. "Multiple contacts approaching from the north. 3 individuals, one matches the target description." Maria's pulse quickened as she acquired the approaching figures through her scope. The central figure was older than the others, with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. He wore traditional Afghan clothing, but moved with the purposeful stride of a military commander. "Positive identification," Maria whispered, comparing the figure in her scope to the photograph in her mission folder. "That's our target." The high-value target and his escorts made their way to the meeting site, where they were joined by the 2 security personnel who had arrived earlier. Through her scope, Maria could see that they were engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion, with gestures toward various points in the surrounding mountains. "Range to target, 420 meters, Maria reported, making final adjustments to her scope. "Wind is minimal, no atmospheric distortion." "I have a clear shot," Mitchell keyed his radio. "Base, this is Overwatch. We have eyes on the target. Request permission to engage." The response came back immediately. "Overwatch, you are cleared to engage. Repeat, you are cleared to engage." Maria felt the familiar calm settling over her as she prepared to take the shot that would eliminate one of the most dangerous insurgents in the region. But as she began to control her breathing and align her crosshairs, something unexpected happened in the valley below that would test every skill she possessed and force her to make impossible choices in mere seconds. Those impossible choices came in the form of innocent lives hanging in the balance. Just as Maria was preparing to take the shot that would eliminate the high-value target, a new group of figures appeared at the edge of the valley. Through her scope, she could see that these weren't insurgents. They were local civilians, including what appeared to be an elderly man and a young woman carrying a child. "Shit," Mitchell muttered, observing the same development through his binoculars. Civilians just entered the engagement area. Maria kept her crosshairs on the target, but her finger moved away from the trigger. The rules of engagement were clear about civilian casualties, and the presence of non-combatants complicated the situation dramatically. She watched as the insurgent leader noticed the approaching civilians and began gesturing to his men. "They're not part of this," Maria whispered, studying the body language of the civilians. "They look like they're just passing through." But the insurgent leader clearly didn't see it that way. Through her scope, Maria could see him giving orders to his Men and their weapons were now being raised toward the innocent civilians. The situation was escalating from a planned assassination to a potential massacre. "Base, this is Overwatch," Mitchell called urgently. "We have civilians in the engagement area. Target appears to be threatening them." The response was immediate. "Overwatch, protect the civilians. You are authorized to engage." Maria's training kicked in, and she quickly reassessed the tactical situation. The insurgent leader was no longer her only concern. She now had to prevent the execution of innocent people while simultaneously eliminating the primary target. It was the kind of complex scenario that separated skilled snipers from exceptional ones. The insurgent security team was spreading out, moving to surround the civilians. Maria could see the terror in the faces of the elderly man and young woman as they realized they had stumbled into something dangerous. The child in the woman's arms was crying, the sound faintly audible even across the 400 meters that separated them from Maria's position. "I'm going to take the leader first," Maria whispered to Mitchell. "Then work through the security team systematically. Can you talk me through their positions?" "Affirmative." "Target is center mass. 2 security personnel to his left, 2 to his right. They're about 15 meters apart." Maria made rapid calculations. 5 targets. Maximum engagement time of 30 seconds before the survivors would seek cover or potentially harm the civilians. She would need to shoot faster and more accurately than she had ever shot before. Her first shot took the insurgent leader in the chest, dropping him instantly. The sound of the rifle echoed off the valley walls, and chaos erupted below. The security team members spun around, searching for the source of the shot while the civilians screamed and tried to run. Maria's second shot caught the leftmost security operative as he was raising his weapon toward the fleeing civilians. The third shot eliminated his partner before he could take cover behind a large rock. 2 targets down, 2 remaining, but the surviving insurgents were reacting quickly. One of them had grabbed the young woman and was using her as a human shield, while the other was attempting to drag the elderly man toward better cover. Maria found herself facing every sniper's nightmare targets who were intermingled with innocent civilians. "I can't get a clean shot," she reported to Mitchell. "They're using the civilians as shields." "Wait for an opening," Mitchell replied. "Don't rush it." Maria forced herself to remain calm and patient, even as she watched the terrifying scene unfolding below. The insurgent holding the young woman was shouting something in Pashto, his voice carrying clearly across the valley. The child in the woman's arms was still crying, and Maria could see the woman's face clearly through her scope eyes. Wide with terror, tears streaming down her cheeks. Then the insurgent made a mistake. He shifted his position slightly, trying to get a better view of the surrounding ridges to locate the sniper. For just a moment, his head and shoulder were exposed behind the woman's body. It was a difficult shot, requiring absolute precision to avoid hitting the civilian, but it was the opportunity Maria had been waiting for. She controlled her breathing, made minute adjustments for the slight breeze that had picked up, and squeezed the trigger. The insurgent's head snapped back, and he fell away from the woman, who immediately collapsed to the ground clutching her child. 1 target remained. The last insurgent had released the elderly man and was now running toward better cover, firing wildly in the direction he thought the shots were coming from. Maria tracked his movement through her scope, leading him slightly to compensate for his speed. Her final shot caught him mid-stride, and he tumbled forward into the rocky terrain. The valley fell silent except for the distant sound of the civilians' voices as they comforted each other and began to move toward safety. "All targets neutralized," Maria reported. "Civilians appear to be unharmed." Mitchell was already gathering their equipment for immediate extraction. "Outstanding shooting, Santos. That was some of the best precision work I've ever seen." But Maria was still focused on the scene below, watching through her scope as the elderly man helped the young woman to her feet. The child had stopped crying, and all 3 civilians were now moving quickly toward the valley's exit. They were alive because of her actions, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "Base, this is Overwatch," Mitchell called. "Mission complete. All targets eliminated. Civilians safe. Requesting immediate extraction." "Copy, Overwatch. Extraction team en route. Well done." As they prepared to leave their hide site, Maria took one last look at the valley below. The bodies of the insurgents lay scattered among the rocks, while the civilians disappeared into the distance. She had accomplished her mission, but the complexity of the engagement had reminded her why warfare was never as simple as the training. Scenarios made it appear what awaited her back at base would prove that her transformation was far from complete. In fact, it was just beginning. That transformation would reach far beyond anything Maria could have imagined when she first put on her apron 3 months earlier. The extraction helicopter arrived within 30 minutes, its rotor wash stirring up clouds of dust as it touched down on a rocky plateau, 2 kilometers from the observation site. Maria and Mitchell ran toward the aircraft with their equipment, glad to be leaving the exposed mountain terrain behind. As they climbed aboard, Maria could see other soldiers looking at her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Word of her performance was already spreading throughout the unit. During the flight back to Forward Operating Base Wolverine, "Major." Peterson's voice crackled through the helicopter's communication system. "Outstanding work, Overwatch team. Initial intelligence suggests that the target you eliminated was planning a major operation against coalition forces. Your actions likely saved numerous lives." Maria felt a sense of satisfaction at the confirmation, but she was also thinking about the broader implications of what had happened. The successful elimination of the high-value target would disrupt insurgent operations in the region, but it would also likely lead to increased enemy activity as other commanders attempted to fill the leadership vacuum upon their return to base. Maria was immediately summoned to a debriefing session with Colonel Hayes and the intelligence staff. The atmosphere in the command center was markedly different from her previous meetings with the colonel. There was a sense of professional respect that had been completely absent during her time in the kitchen. "Staff Sergeant Santos, Colonel." Hayes began. "Your performance during this mission was exceptional. The precision required to eliminate 5 targets while protecting civilian lives represents the highest level of marksmanship skill. However, I'm more impressed by your tactical decision-making under pressure." Maria stood at attention, but Hayes gestured for her to sit. The situation with the civilians could have ended very differently. Your ability to adapt to changing circumstances and prioritize the protection of innocent lives while still accomplishing the mission objective demonstrates the kind of judgment we need in our most critical operations. Major Peterson opened a folder and spread several photographs across the table. "These are surveillance images of the target location taken after your engagement. The intelligence materials found on the high-value target have provided us with significant information about planned attacks against coalition forces." Maria studied the photographs, noting the precision of her shots and the positions of the fallen insurgents. It was strange to see the tactical situation from an overhead perspective, making it look almost like a training exercise rather than a life-and-death engagement. "Based on the success of this mission," Hayes continued, "I'm recommending you for advanced sniper training and a possible assignment to a special operations unit. Your skills are too valuable to be limited to standard reconnaissance operations." The offer was exactly what Maria had hoped for when she first enlisted, but she found herself thinking about the young soldiers like Corporal Jenkins who had asked her for marksmanship training. "Sir, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'd like to request permission to establish a formal training program here at the base. There are soldiers in this unit who could benefit from advanced marksmanship instruction." Hayes looked surprised by her response. "You're turning down a special operations assignment to stay here and train soldiers?" "I'm not turning it down permanently, sir, but I think there's important work to be done here. The convoy rescue showed me that there are soldiers in this unit who have the potential to develop advanced skills, but they lack proper training. If I can help improve their capabilities, it could have a significant impact on mission success and force protection. The colonel considered her words carefully. That's an interesting perspective, Santos. How would you structure such a program? Maria had been thinking about this since her conversation with Jenkins. I'd recommend a 2-week intensive course focusing on precision shooting, range estimation, and tactical movement. We could run multiple sessions throughout the deployment, training soldiers who show aptitude for advanced marksmanship. And you believe this would be more valuable than your participation in special operations missions? I believe it would be more valuable to the unit, sir. One exceptional sniper can make a difference in individual operations, but training multiple soldiers to improve their marksmanship capabilities has a multiplier effect that benefits every mission. Hayes nodded slowly. Very well, I'm authorizing you to establish the training program, but I'm also keeping the Special Operations recommendation active. You can develop your curriculum and train our soldiers, but I want you available for high-priority missions when they arise. As the meeting concluded, Maria realized that her role at Forward Operating Base Wolverine was continuing to evolve. She was no longer just a cook who had proven herself in combat, or even just a sniper who had successfully eliminated a high-value target. She was becoming a force multiplier, someone whose skills could improve the capabilities of the entire unit. That evening, as she worked on developing her training curriculum, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. Just days ago, she had been invisible, a background figure serving meals to soldiers who barely acknowledged her existence. Now she was being asked to shape the tactical capabilities of her unit and potentially influence the course of their deployment. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. It had required her to prove herself in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable, to risk her life not just for her own validation, but for the survival of her fellow soldiers. But more than that, it had required her to maintain her professionalism and dedication even when she was being underutilized and undervalued. As she put the finishing touches on her training outline, Maria smiled at the thought of working with soldiers like Jenkins, young men and women who had the potential to become exceptional marksmen if given proper instruction and opportunity. Her skills, which had been locked away in the kitchen for months, were now going to be shared with an entire generation of soldiers. The cook had become a teacher, and her influence would extend far beyond any single mission or engagement. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us,